And with this, I would say you've already proven a bit of resilience, but let's have a look how you can actually rate that creative resilience once more. Please welcome on stage to chair this panel. She's Managing Director and Workforce and Organizations at Capgemini Invent. Please welcome on stage Claudia Crummenerl with her speakers. Please give it up for them.
That was great. Thank you.
So, while everybody is taking a seat, let's get started into this exciting panel. A little bit of a very difficult question we felt when preparing for this. So over the last 1.5 days, you already heard a lot around creative resilience, what it could be, what it isn't. Our theme for the next hour or so is going to be how you could or would build creative resilience, and whether or not this would be something you could deliberately enhance, whether it is a measurable management goal, or is this something you can actually measure. It's around also where to start building creative resilience. Is that on an individual level, on a team, on an organizational level? And in the preparation, we were in the discussion, I was in the discussion, very much reminded of a Tolkien quote out of Lord of the Rings, that even the smallest of persons can make a difference and change the future. So maybe a little bit of a food for thought for you guys, because this is not just a panel for us to talk, but for you to take something away from our distinguished panelists. With that, let me introduce them, and I will hope not to screw this up, because this could be a little bit unfortunate. Right to my left, Sally Susman, Executive Vice President and Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Pfizer. She's the author of a book called Breaking Through, which is a Wall Street bestseller, and I hope a lot of you have read it. I thought it was very inspiring. And she is also the co-chair of International Rescue Committee and actively shaping global crisis responses, and was responsible as well to shape Pfizer's response during COVID. Yves is a distinguished professor in strategic management and technological innovation. He has positions at INSEAD and Harvard Business School, bridging academia and industry. He's honored with the C.K. Prahalad Distinguished Scholar Practitioner Award for his achievements, and he's also obviously accomplished author of books, and including one that I thought was interesting, Ringtone: Exploring the Rise and Fall of Nokia, so something around resilience of organizations, potentially. Carla Arellano is a partner at Greyhound Capital, providing expert counsel across industries, in particular talking to founders and leaders on how they could accelerate and scale startups. She is within that, or as part of that, assessing management organizational capability and potential in order to potentially invest into companies. And last but not least, and this time not looking straight at you, Dr. Hannes Mösenbacher. He is the Chief Risk Officer of Raiffeisen Bank International. He has a professional career long in banking, and I would say his job is is managing crisis and resilience, and he's gone through or experienced plenty of them. In the preparation, we talked about the financial crisis in 2008 and 2014. We talked about COVID. We talked about now the start of the war. So reaction to crisis is part of your job. Now, let's start into the conversation. Let's start with a short definition of what creative resilience is. And I'm going to go one by one. Start with you, Sally. Maybe an introductory statement of what creative resilience is for you.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for the excellent introductions. It's great to be here. And when I first heard the phrase creative resilience, I really had to think about it. I mean, these aren't two words that are often next to each other, and I was glad for the opportunity to sort of delve into it. And for me, resiliency means a tenacity, a stubbornness, a commitment to problem solving. And yet, when it's sitting next to the word creative, I feel it's done in a unique way, maybe with kindness or imagination, innovation. So these are the two ideas sitting as new friends with each other in creative resilience.
Yves.
Well, I had a bit of the same dilemma, which is, it's two words which are surprising when brought together. And I thought about creative resilience in the context of recovery from major disasters, accidents, and the like. And in some sense, there is a creative dimension to trying to find a solution. When you don't really understand fully the situation, you learn about it only by discovery over time, because many things are abnormal. Most things are abnormal. You are in an out of normal situation. But there are other words that come to mind. There is a creative dimension, obviously, but there is also almost a more down-to-earth view. You know, the word bricolage in French comes to mind. You know, you basically try to find a solution to something which you don't fully understand, which is not normal. You move and you fix certain things, and you may solve a problem, you may run into another problem. So there is a part of imagination, there is a part of creativity, there is a part of discovery, but there is also a part, at least in the situations I observed, which is, you know, very action-oriented. Okay, what are we going to do next? How are we going to try to fix this? So it's very much the duality between creative but also very practical, down-to-earth problem solving.
Carla.
I think we probably all had very similar reactions in terms of taking these two words together. For me, it came at a really interesting time where I had joined Greyhound Capital, and my role there in sort of what the fund does is look for startups and scale-ups that can grow exponentially over time. And as I was thinking about that and sort of this concept of creative resilience, what really came to me is that when we look for a business to invest in, partner with a founder or a founding team, the resilience has to be there, right? To come up with an idea, build a product, hire people, get funding, you need a lot of resilience in order to go out and do that. And to be able to sort of go at it again and again and again, the rejection that you get in getting funding and launching a product, etc. The nuance really came for me in bringing in the word creative to that, because I think what we started to see and what we look for is companies that and founders who have that resilience and are also aiming it and pointing it at new business models, new products, new services, new ways of building their companies. So for me, creative resilience really came down to this ability to overcome challenges and keep pushing through, that tenacity that Sally mentioned, alongside a passion and a focus on creating new, whether it's creating new in your business or creating new externally for customers.
Hannes?
Well, I'm happy being here on this panel because, you know, when you gave me those two keywords, I thought, wow, Holy Mary, creative and resilience. Well, maybe my pre-speaker will tell something intelligent. So I looked up Mr. Google and found a very beautiful definition of resilience, where it was about the capacity and the process to adjustment and to adopt from a threatening and a challenging situation. Well, this would be the definition of resilience, and you could also talk about capacity management, but now the creative part. And I thought about my current duty as a Chief Risk Officer. We have in our organization, in Raiffeisen Bank International, we use the term proactivity. And what is proactivity? Proactivity means that you're not just talking about the problem, but you get into motion. So you see something, and you get into motion, and you start preparing. So this is, for me, the creative part. And the other way I was thinking about this first part, you know, this creative, this flexibility and the capacity to adjust to a new circumstances. This would be my definition of the resilience and the creative part.
Okay. So something that is a reaction and adaptability to a certain event, to a situation, and that shows in the reaction and how we react to that situation. Finding solution, pragmatic, yet action-oriented and impactful to solve the solution. Now, Yves, you said in our preparation as well, there are specific events that tie potentially resilience to persons or a team. Can you give us examples about how resilience showed and what capabilities or strengths you saw?
Yes, well, let me take one example, very, very practical, one we researched a few years ago now. You know, there still is, unfortunately, but there has been a civil war in Yemen for quite some time between the central government supported by Saudi Arabia and the Houthis supported by Iran. And the UNICEF was for years supplying the Houthis, which were in the most isolated part of the country, with basic food and drinking water and so on. And then the Saudis bombed the only port, Hodeidah, on the Red Sea. The port was destroyed. All of a sudden, it was impossible to have anything, to unload any ship in that port. And they were taking tons and tons, perhaps thousands of tons of rice and a lot of commodity stuff. It's not medication and small volume goodies. And UNICEF was fantastic. If you look at it on a normal day, it's a big UN bureaucracy. Its headquarters in Europe are in Copenhagen. It's a big warehouse and so on. And then what happened there? In 48 hours, they found an innovative solution. Okay, ships cannot go there, but we'll find small boats. And you have these dhows in the literally sailboats. I mean, now they have motors, but very traditional boats in the Red Sea, which don't need a harbor. Then they rerouted flights from Copenhagen to Amman, and then from Amman to Djibouti. They set up a base in Djibouti, and they supported this whole operation. And in 48 hours, they had recovered most of their transportation capability. They had put 200 people from Copenhagen into either Djibouti and Amman, all of a sudden, overnight. It's an amazing show of resilience, because they were able to find an innovative solution. They were able to mobilize people to manage to deal with these dozens of captains of these little ships, of these little boats, and deal with them, find some way to agree on prices and freight and so on. It's an amazing thing. It's a very, very agile organization. And I think, when we start digging into it, what do we find? We find that the culture is not the culture of a bureaucracy, of a UN bureaucracy. The culture is very much can-do. They are used to intervene in very difficult areas around the world. They can organize themselves in an emergent way very, very rapidly. And also they have a feature in their culture which is very important, which I call sometimes give before you take. Academics would call it generalized reciprocity, but basically I come to help without asking any question about am I going to get something in return. I trust the organization to help me if I need something in the future, but that's not today's conversation. It's the opposite of a transactional culture. It's not immediately saying, well, if you want so many tons, this is going to cost you so much, and so on. So it's an example I find fascinating, because again, it has this duality of being very rigid. I mean, if you imagine the UN, they have all kinds of rules about how you spend money, about the mix of people from various nationalities, and so on, and so on, and so on. And at the same time, very, very resilient, very agile, very innovative.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds there's a basis for specific skills that they can find a solution, but it's also about the culture and the mindset.
Absolutely.
That you found. Maybe, I think in the preparation, we talked very much about mindset and leadership as another dimension for resilience. Now, we can look at it also afterwards, but maybe if you want to share the Pfizer story.
Sure, and I think Hannes made a very important point that sometimes this happens at its best against a backdrop of crisis. You mentioned the crisis that the goods couldn't get through, forced a resilience. And certainly for all of us, COVID posed extraordinary challenges on so many levels. And really it wasn't until the crisis that we even contemplated the possibility of creating a vaccine in 8 months. It's a 12-year process. And my boss, Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla, he didn't say, okay, crisis, instead of 12 years, we'll do it in 8 years, or 6 years, or 4 years, but that we would do it in 8 months. And the reason I say that is because if we had done it, 6 years, 4 years, we would have tried to just amend our existing processes, make it a little faster. But because of this bold ambition to make the vaccine in 8 months, we had to do everything in a different way. Instead of a linear process, we did everything at once. We started working on manufacturing before approvals, and it created a tremendous amount of risk. But it also unearthed a new culture. Pfizer and BioNTech made an mRNA vaccine, as did Moderna. And I have so much admiration for Moderna. They are a new company, as you know, and this was their first drug. So major kudos to them. I think it might have been harder being in a big company, a 150-year-old company, and trying to get us to be agile and move like we had to move in that time. I learned one thing. Well, I learned a lot of things. I had many lessons during the pandemic, but one that I think about a lot, and goes, Claudia, to your question, is a paraphrasing of Aristotle saying, our problem is not that we think big and miss. Our problem is we aim low and hit. And so, somewhere in this notion of creative resilience has to be some, intense pressures, some huge opportunities, and a willingness to take risk.
Mm-hmm. And I think it was a big risk they took. So we had now 2 examples, kind of a little bit looking at it in retrospective. In the preparation, I felt it was interesting talking to you, Hannes, because anticipating crises and events is part of your job. So what is it that makes the skill of managing that resilience and driving and forward-looking, rather trying to anticipate things? What do you do and how do you do that?
Well, I believe there would be 2 main ingredients. The one is that you set up the organization in a way which makes then, if the crisis hits the floor, that you can then move fast. So we have, as a bank, usually every bank would have this as sort of a contingency committee. So the people know their role, they know how to contribute in a typical fast-forward, agile way of doing. So a new topic comes up, it's being prioritized in the team, one is taking responsibility, executes, come back. The other one is, and this is, I think, why is this so important? Because certain patterns of crisis do repeat itself. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, I'm not claiming that I can forecast everything. I'm not doing this. But I believe, for instance, when the central bank have been so outspoken that they will now end this long-term low-yield interest, they have been extremely outspoken. So you can now get the message of the central bank responsible ones, say, well, this is now the time to raise, and say, yes, they told me, yes, it's now time to raise. But going back to your organization and say, well, what will this mean to me, to my organization, to other competitors? This, I think, is the trick, and there are many of these things. So we know that interest rates will stay most probably high. Inflation will not come down tomorrow. So we can already do the second step and ask ourselves, well, if this holds true, what does this mean to us? And if you would look on how to define risk management, it's the deviation from the expected case. Mm-hmm. This is what is risk management about, because everything else is anyway expected. So we need to prepare ourselves in this term of resilience. Also, how do we prepare for if there is a deviation from the expected case? And this is what you can do forward-looking and what you can do already preparing proactive. And I sense that if there comes in a complete new situation, of course it takes us a little bit of time to see and to embrace what's going on. But certain steps are repeating. And then this gives a lot of comfort to the team, knowing, yes, we have thought about this. And if only every second or third step you have pre-sensed, you are extremely confident on walking through this new challenge.
So it's preparation in terms of processes, but also in terms of what you need in terms of governance structures, how to react. And I thought the last part was quite important or interesting, giving the confidence that there is something like a playbook or so they can use to react if something is going on.
So this is what I sense, that then colleagues find confidence and then executing. And if there comes something new, well, you have to reshift the team and give this task, this currently believed unsolvable task to the team. They come back, they come and have a solution, and it's been again orchestrated. But the remaining organization can keep on walking because they know, well, we have prepared this, we know this one, this reminds me to what we already have seen, this is what we were talking about. So because you need also to keep the organization ongoing.
Carla, also you're looking at the forward thinking, how to build resilience in scaling up organization. Are there any other attributes or competencies additionally to the process and the confidence?
Sure. So one of the things that we did is we actually looked at about 352 digital banks, so business to business or business to consumer banks that were started in the past 30 or so years, and studied them first to sort of understand, well, who's sort of at that forefront of creative resilience, who's actually still around, 10, 15, 20 years later, and more importantly, who's still delighting customers, launching products, evolving business models. And we found about 50 or so of those that seem to be on that curve. And I think the lesson for me with creative resilience is it happens over time, so you can't ever quite claim success. But for those who seem to be in the front runner space, two things really stood out in terms of how they are building themselves. The first is what I'm going to call sort of the machine or the system. So the founding team, whether it's the CEO, a group of co-founders, et cetera, they invest a lot of time in designing the organizational system that they will use to grow the company, similar to the processes that Hans is describing. And they do it with an eye towards usually creating autonomy, engendering a lot of transparency so that autonomy doesn't become chaos, and really encouraging and cultivating dissension and debate within the organization. And we've looked at these in different forms. They have different words. They might have a different, culture value statement, et cetera. But what they are trying to get at is creating a system, an organization structure of way of working that really relies on the individual's autonomy and decision-making to be able to drive things forward. And the second thing that they do quite a bit of is invest a lot of time in people, in the types of people that they hire. Are these people who will thrive in this type of ecosystem? To a certain degree, as a startup or a scale-up, you have many challenges. One of the benefits that you have is you can actually be pretty proactive about how you build the team and the people you bring on board. They also spend a lot of time cultivating and developing those people to work in a particular way. And I think that creates an ingrained ability to be resilient and creative at the same time, so that, when the product you launched didn't work and COVID happens, you can actually pivot pretty quickly, launch a new product, send everybody home, and have them develop the next product and take it to market within 6 months.
Okay, so I think we have a lot of things you could build in terms of capacity. What are effective strategies you've seen work? And I would probably look at Yves for this, because I thought in the preparation what was interesting, you shared an example of Japan, where you have the same event hit two different organizations, let me put it that way, not to tell you a story.
Yes. Just perhaps to echo a couple of the previous points. Anticipation is really, you need to imagine the unimaginable. And you need to build a form of intellectual resilience. I've never seen this, I will probably never see it, But if it does happen, I will have a sense of what it's all about and why it's so dangerous. I was struck again to take you a very practical example. I was in Israel probably in the mid-90s, and they were building the first skyscrapers in Tel Aviv. And they had created a scenario saying, well, it may very well be that the Palestinians hijack a plane and drive it into our skyscrapers. And that was the beginning of the Iron Dome project, which you have heard of in the past few weeks. So there was this, whereas 9/11 in the US took the US by surprise because it was outside of the view. And then the second point I wanted to make was go back to say flexibility in deploying resources. That's the UNICEF example. The third one is I think what you were alluding to. It's related more to leadership, and I'm just going there to use an example I find fascinating, which has been researched also. We all have known about the Fukushima tragedy and the Fukushima reactors blowing up and so on. What most of us don't know is 10 kilometers south of Fukushima, there is another power station with another 4 nuclear reactors. It's called Fukushima Daiichi. Never heard of it. They were submitted to the same earthquake, to the same tsunami, to the same damage, to the same extensive destruction, and so on. The main difference was Masuda-san, the head of the power plant we never hear about, did not panic, did not try to apply a blueprint of emergency procedures and so on, because he knew this was beyond what had been planned by emergency procedures. He started sending some of his employees after he had more or less secured that there was no big radiation leakage, to literally into the buildings of the reactors as soon as the water had receded. They found out that perhaps they could put the pumps of the cooling system back in service, but electricity supply had exploded essentially. And then this man mobilized 400 workers, all hands on deck. The total staff, the people who were working, the people who were not working, perhaps a few were taking care of their families or of loved one who has disappeared, but nearly 400 people. And they pulled from some location a couple of kilometers away, electrical cables. And electrical cables are just very heavy. Imagine moving these, even if they were on these big rollers, wood rollers. Imagine moving them without machines, without anything. They managed to connect the reactors, at least one of the reactors, the one that was on the critical path to explode, very shortly, very rapidly, and after a few hours, they were out of trouble. The next day, they connected the other 3. End of the story. Now, what's wonderful is, I should say, what did this man do? He made sense of the situation without panicking. He provided calm and strength. He involved his workers into making sense of the situation. And then he gave sense. He gave sense in saying, the priority ought to be, the objective ought to be to get the cooling system to function again. And to this, we need to have the pumps working. To get the pumps working, we need electricity supply. The electricity supply system is destroyed. Therefore, we'll have, and I'm back to my bricolage point, but it's bricolage on a big scale. We'll have to basically build a new one. And in a night, I think, a dozen hours, I don't remember the exact timing, they managed to bring electricity to the first reactor, 2 hours before it would have gone critical. So there are 2 hours to go before, basically leakage and explosions would have started. I think it's remarkable because it's very clear, everyone involved, very clear goal, very clear priority, sense-making, sense-giving, setting a clear objective. And literally, imagine these people, 400 people pulling on these cables, like seamen used to do in sailboats in the old days. So you can imagine the work. So I think that's really an example of a leader who kept his calm, and that's perhaps the most important point. Kept calm, made sense, gave work, mobilized everyone.
Mm-hmm. Like going back a little bit to the point of giving confidence and how to react. Was it researched of why this Matsuda-san reacted the way he did versus the other manager?
Some of it, no, I don't have all the details. Some of it was probably down to personality, that you had someone who were just The other manager, what is known is the other manager tried to apply the procedure book. And the situation was so far out of what had been anticipated. No one had anticipated a tsunami of that height that would essentially cut down the whole electrical systems, that the procedure book did not work. Whereas what Masuda-san did was just to say, well, let's understand what the problem is. So long as we don't really understand the problem, we won't be looking for the right solution.
So it comes down to build individual resilience, actually.
Absolutely.
In order to have resilience in crisis situations for the team and the organization, potentially.
Yeah. Yes.
And maybe that was a conversation, Carla, you and I had in the preparation. Is something you observed as well when trying to grow startups, the leader, and what kind of attributes and traits you're looking for who's able to scale and be resilient.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes. One of the things that we started with a few hypotheses around, is it somebody who's founded a company in the past, or is it somebody who has more of a charismatic or iconic personality, et cetera. And some of the traits that we found to come out pretty clearly in several of these leaders is, first, they have a very bold ambition and aspiration, a little bit in line, Sally, with what you were saying around, let's not shoot for 6 years, right? Let's actually shoot for 8 months. And they have this boldness of aspiration and vision that they can use to bring others along with them. And I think that is really key because many of them, the other trait that they have is that they are very self-aware of what their strengths are and where they actually need others. And so in being able to communicate that bold vision, that aspiration for where you could go as a business, the product that is in their head but hasn't been launched yet, they can also bring others with them on that journey and find out, am I complementing myself with a very strong technology person, or am I complementing myself with a very strong HR person or somebody in the risk area if I'm launching a digital bank. And that is a uniqueness around that self-awareness and that bold vision that really comes together. The third thing that we found with them in that sort of lens is that they are also very, very, there's different terms for it, but I like to think about it as they have a very adaptable mindset or a growth mindset, right? They're very much oriented towards, I don't know everything, and I'm going to learn and adapt. And that doesn't mean, actually we had a very interesting debate around the role of humility. Which is, this type of leader, this type of CEO, is he or she a very humble person? And what we actually found across the research is that humility can be great, but you also need somebody who has the confidence to be able to push through regardless of the challenge. So what matters more to a certain degree is that boldness and aspiration, that openness to debate and dialogue and learn, whether or not it is rooted in humility or in curiosity or passion for your vision. So those have been some of the learnings around the role of the leader themselves, but then also how they can bring the organization with them and create a system for everybody else as well.
I just thank you, Carla. That was great. I want to build on what you're saying and add maybe one or just two more qualities. And that is, I'm reminded of a story from New York City, where I live, after 9/11. And American Express Company, their headquarters are right down by the World Trade Towers. And their CEO, who was a new CEO at the time, Ken Chenault, was out of the city, had to travel back across country, no airplanes for flying. He drove across America to get back to New York. And he had a gut instinct that he needed to get people together in a room. And yet, there was he couldn't get into his offices. The headquarters were closed. Lower Manhattan was locked down. So he rented out Madison Square Garden, our largest facility in the city, and invited all the employees from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut to come to this session. And his staff gave him a piece of paper, a very beautiful speech to read, which he threw away. And he spoke from his heart. He expressed his empathy, his own, feelings of loss. They lost the lives of employees and their families. He waded into the crowd. He touched people. And in the end, he basically said, American Express's best days are ahead of them. And so I feel the definition of a leader who can exhibit creative resilience is a purveyor of hope and optimism. I put a lot of weight on hope and optimism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, if I may just add one point, perhaps echoing what you say, it's building a sense of community. What I've seen in all the cases we studied, it's leaders who were able to show a lot of resilience, were able to build a sense of community among all the people who could contribute to solve the challenge, solve the crisis, solve the problem. And it's an emotional commitment. It's not an intellectual nor even a task-oriented commitment.
I really like where you're going with that, because one of the debates you hear a lot, at least in the world that I'm in, is, are you building a company that's like a family, or is it a sports team? Or there's a lot of different phrases that people sort of toss around. And what we found, at least in the research, is that you can build a company that operates like a family, or you can build one that operates like a team. The core is building something where people have an emotional commitment to the success and see themselves as a part of it. Whichever way you frame it for them, that you're able to connect.
And this would be my next question to you guys, maybe to whoever wants to start. How do you build that culture, that community? And I would have looked to you, because I think in the book and how you write about the Pfizer story, I think there may be some lessons about how you build that community, how you rally people around that.
There are obviously many ways you rally these communities, and I'm sure my panelists have a lot to add, but I'll say the most important thing was to crush the bureaucracy. Big companies, big institutions, they become bureaucratic. Like, I don't know how this happens, but it happens. And in our daily lives, the boss tells the next bosses, who tell the next bosses, and something gets lost. A lot gets lost. But during the pandemic, we would meet 3 or 4 times a week, and everybody was in the conversation. This was an upside of working virtually. People, could dial in from anywhere. And I just think that one of the greatest barriers to creating the community that we want to that we're talking about on the stage is bureaucracy. It's a terrible thing that needs to be knocked out.
Okay.
I know you might disagree.
Hans, do you want to go?
Well, what I sense there is that on those situations where this resilience is being really requested and challenged, what I learned is that if you involve your colleagues and to co-create.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the one thing. So if you co-create, you immediately also get the sort of sensing and felt responsibility. Then the other one is, then you give, within this co-creation, you give autonomy and responsibility. And if the contribution, and then there is contribution and you appreciate the contribution, and do not forget to celebrate. No, really. So this is it may sound a very easy recipe, but this is the way because this is creating community. Because if I say I know everything and you know nothing, how would you like to create a resilient team? But if you co-create, if you give responsibility, autonomy was said, and then with the contribution, you're getting one step closer to a solution, with another contribution and so forth, and also to celebrate from time to time. Must not be a night-long party, but also say, hey, we have done this pretty well.
Any additions?
But that's a very nice summary, actually, of the Fukushima story of the reactors which did not explode. Exactly what you're saying applied there. Creating, involving everyone into the control room of the center of the power plant, and doing exactly what you said. So it's a wonderful summary. Yes, it applies.
Then let me come to our, impossible question that we had in the preparation.
Okay.
How do you measure that we build creative resilience? And how can it be measurable? Maybe Hannes starting with it as well.
Claudia, when you gave me the first time this question, I thought risk management is so much about a proper measurement. but I have done a long walk on this, and I would come up with 2 proposals. The one is the starting point, and if you look, for instance, at one of the metrics in corporate finance, you could say what is the likelihood to default, or you could also say what is your rating. Because I think it is something different if you already start from a very weak position, because then you may hit the floor sooner than anyone else who could have a better starting point. And the other one where I would be extremely sure is what is your capacity and your speed to adjust and to adopt. Yeah. So I would have those 2, this would be my definition. So what is your starting point over the cycle, as you said? So not just 1 year being constructive, but if you have proven over 3-4 cycles that you can keep on growing and having a broader customer base, I think this is one demonstration that you were capable to adjust. And if then things changing dramatically, how fast you're capable to adopt. This would be my definition. Hopefully it works with my panelists.
Yves, if I can turn to you.
Well, it seems to me, a big key is a problem-solving behavior. It's really focusing on, and without too much prejudice, without too much prior judgment, basically saying what's the problem, what is the nature of the problem we are facing, although we have never seen it. Can we understand it? Can we make sense? And much to your point, sense-making is not top-down. Sense-making involves everyone in the group. And that, in my sense, creates resilient capabilities. But being problem-oriented can be practiced day to day. It doesn't need to be big crises or big difficulties. It is just being problem-oriented more than procedure-driven. It's back to the point about bureaucracy also, which is dangerous, the point you were making.
So actually the question around measuring is probably the wrong one, is how do you practice the skills on a regular basis to be prepared?
Now we're getting somewhere. Because when you gave us this question, it terrified me also. I mean, there is no...
Difficult question.
Although Hannes did a great job, as did you, Professor. And I think that there's an important thing to do to quantify or to make a legacy of the creative resiliency work. And yes, metrics are very important, but so too is storytelling. And it's a part of what motivated me to write the book, part of what motivates me to be so happy to be here today, and part of what I find fascinating about what the others are sharing is, as cultures, as communities, if we have stories, lore, examples that we celebrate, to your point, it becomes, I don't know if the word is measurable, but it certainly becomes real.
Yeah.
Carla, to add?
We actually tried to come up with a measure for creative resilience. Lots of debate, lots of data that was, not necessarily of great quality. One of the things that we looked at was, for startups and scale-ups, was their funding over time and sort of how long they survived. Not just sort of survived, but had money in the bank to continue functioning and growing. That, though, was just one side of the equation. We also needed to sort of look at that creativity. So we also looked at sort of velocity of launching new products, going into new different business models, going into new markets, and some measure of customer delight. And I think that the big learning was that we could get some visual or some sense sort of after the fact of who was on a good track as a company, as an organization. But maybe the most useful thing was going underneath that to see, well, what are these organizations doing? And what could be the most important thing that you could do to create that creative resilience? Because at the end of the day, the measurement after the fact is less useful. And the one maybe takeaway for me and from a lot of the research and speaking to a lot of the leaders at these organizations and the people in them is the one thing that I think you can really do to try to engender more of that is be really thoughtful about where and what decisions are made when. Almost to the degree that, some of the CEOs that I spoke with or the leaders that I spoke with, the fewer decisions that they make, the better. right? That's the true signal of autonomy and creativity and resilience in the organization. If, as a senior leader, you are setting high-level strategy or setting direction, and then the organization is driving the decision-making in how to iterate on a product, what market to go into, when to take down a product that's not working. Your role is guiding that. One of the CEOs that I spoke with actually said, his role is to provide counsel, to guide, to provide problem solving, as you're saying. But the work and the decision making is done by the team, right? It's the team who actually delivers it. And so that was my big takeaway on sort of the practice. There's many things to do, but that empowerment at the individual level really makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. And this is where I wanted us to get into as a next step, because we talked a lot about now individual resilience and practices and what we can do. So the decision-making structures could be something to develop organizational resilience. What other strategies have you seen work maybe in your job, Hannes?
Well, I believe that these things are overlapping. I think if you want to look for a resilient team, and with the little practice we have started this session, and all team members come in like this, it will get a little bit difficult. And I think it's also a sort of caretaking by yourself, so that you're also managing your resources and your resilience if you come to the table of the team. Where I believe, what I sensed is, if you have a team which has a very high capacity to work in an agile mode, these guys or these teams are really resilient. So because they give themselves the agenda, and I can very much relate to what you are saying, well, they deliver a certain solution, product, whatever. So this is the strategic aim, and on this way they can organize themselves. So we have completely changed the way how we build, for instance, software and infrastructure. We are going very much with this agile. And then you also have this sense making, because then people know, hey, this little part of the whole is mine. I was contributing. I was not just filling out the form or whatever, but I was contributing. So this is how I would define the resilience of a team, that they can self-organize. So in our way of talking about this decision making and in an agile mode. At the same time, you cannot hide away. You cannot hide away, because if you're then being part of these 10 people or 12 people or 15 people, well, people are relying on your contribution. This would be my way on looking at how resilient a certain team is, and also what sort of practices they are deploying. Is it really just 9 to 5 and say, well, this is it, and so we start sharp at 9 and we stop sharp at 5? Or is it also, when we are close to finish something, we finish it? Are we also willing to go out once for a drink, something like this? So this is how I would measure, or how I would look at the team. And also, last contribution is the capacity to reflect on your progress. So why did we achieve? So I'm a big fan on both sides. I know that our society these days is loves talking about why did we fail, but I also like to talk about why did we succeed. Because this could be the good ingredients for for the next thing. So what did we like? And to be conscious why you succeed is also a cool ingredient potentially for your next success.
I also think that resilient teams are often the summation of resilient people, and that there's not such a difference between the organizations and the people who make up that organization. And when interviewing people for roles, of course I want to know what their previous experience was, or what their education is. But a favorite question I like to ask is, would you be willing to share a hardship that you overcame? And whether it was something of a health crisis, or someone who was a refugee, or someone who had to work through a bias against them, bringing together resilient people from different places can be very exciting. We had an off-site meeting, and we had all the people in the room. We'd been working together for years, But we'd never stopped and sort of asked people, well, what's your story? You know, who are you really? Like, what makes you go? And we found that almost everyone around the table had overcome something. And so I think sharing whatever drives the individual to be resilient is impactful to making the team resilient.
Mm-hmm. That's a really nice conclusion almost. I would have wanted to ask each of you to have kind of a concluding statement before we open up to questions from the audience. And maybe start from the back, Hannes.
Well,
maybe
what I had to learn, you know, my last statement is what I had to learn for myself is that resilience does not come by itself. So you have to do something for your resilience. You manage your resources, you have to find your way, my way. I found this. I really go a long distance walk on the weekend. I take care about my nutrition. I like also hanging out with my friends. So that is my personal recipe for resilience. And, you know, whatever new situation comes, I also need to be caretaking. And the same I would expect from my team. This is my contribution to today's channel.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great one. I think my thought is a little bit in line, Sally, with what you were saying, is that an organization is the sum of its people. And so when you think about the company you're in, the team you're in, whatever role you have, really cultivate that ability in yourself to take the risk, make the decision, be creative. And if the system is maybe not set up to let you do that, see how you can actually impact it. Because at the end of the day, the company, the organization is you, right? And you are the company and the organization. And I think we all, I'm reflecting a lot on the session yesterday on regret for those of you who joined it. But I think it's very true, right? The things you regret are the times when you weren't as bold, particularly in when you could have been more creative, when you could have pushed on a decision. And I think every organization will be better and every team will be better if we all do more of that.
Mm-hmm. Yves.
Yeah, the only thing I would like to add is, we did not really discuss, is peer-to-peer feedback. Mm. I found that in the situations I observed very important, that people were, in a friendly way, in a constructive way, willing to be told, willing to hear what their shortcomings were and how it could be done better. And that people were also, in a transparent way, willing to discuss each other's shortcomings. So it's a culture of recognizing mutual qualities and also improving or remedying mutual deficiencies, if you wish. And I think that's very, very important to have this lateral integration mechanism as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I agree with everything that you all said. I benefit a lot from peer mentoring, friends with whom we exchange or share, advise each other. Final thought from me would be that all the great leaders I've observed, worked for 9 CEOs, a couple of cabinet secretaries, they're all talented, they're all hardworking, they're all thinking deeply. But the ones who are groundbreaking and really can change the paradigm are those who know that communications is not a soft skill or an afterthought, that it's a rock-hard competency. And not only must they do these things, they must explain and amplify and share them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, I would look into the audience. I think there are microphones, and see whether there's questions. We have still a couple minutes left on what your thoughts are. Very quiet after lunch. Everybody is still in a coma. If there's no questions, then I think the Druckerfirm will be very pleased we stay on time. I would like to thank you guys for the exciting discussion, the preparation. It was really a pleasure, and hope all of you have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as you have said, you might not have found the perfect measurement for creative resilience, but definitely you have shared the stories and we can profit from those. So thank you so much.